What happens when a tough girl from South Chicago faces bullying at an elite high school? Lena Carter, a survivor, must decide whether to stay silent or fight for justice and self-respect. Feel free to leave a comment about where you're watching this from. Enjoy the video and have a great time. Lena Carter had just transferred to Eagle Ridge High, a school in a quiet, affluent neighborhood that felt completely foreign to her. Coming from the tough streets of South Chicago, where every day was a fight to survive, Lena had learned to deal with hardship in ways her new peers couldn't even imagine. Her world was full of noise, the constant wail of sirens, the shouting matches between neighbors, and the sense of danger lurking just outside her door. But that life, that struggle, was now behind her. She had come to Eagle Ridge for a fresh start, hoping to find a place where she could breathe. But the glossy, pristine walls of Eagle Ridge only seemed to mock her. The students here lived in a bubble of privilege, talking about vacations in Europe, shopping sprees at the latest malls, and spending their weekends at country clubs. They wore designer clothes, and their conversations were filled with references to things Lena didn't understand. It wasn't just the material things. It was the way they moved through life as if it was all handed to them. As Lena walked through the hallways, she felt like a fish out of water. She was an outsider in a world where everyone else seemed to have their place already. Lena didn't fit in, and she knew it. The tight, coiled hair she wore with pride was often the subject of whispered comments behind her back. Her clothes, hand-me-downs from her mother, were practical, but they didn't have the same designer labels as the ones her classmates wore. And her dark skin, something she had always loved about herself, seemed to make her a target for the subtle, and sometimes not so subtle, racism that lingered in the air. It didn't take long for the whispers to start. At first, they were just small things, comments about her accent or the way she dressed. But as the days wore on, they grew bolder. Ethan Westbrook, the golden boy of Eagle Ridge, seemed to take an especial interest in her. He had the looks, the charisma, and the popularity that made everyone around him want to be his friend. Tess Richards, the pretty girl who always wore a smile that could light up a room, was never far behind, joining in on the jokes. And then there was Kyle Foster, the big jock who seemed to think that if Ethan had a problem with someone, it was his job to back it up. Their bullying started off small, jokes about her clothes or her hair, but soon it became personal. Ethan, with his usual grin, would make comments about Lena's exotic looks or how she must not know what a real beauty salon was. It was the kind of thing that felt like it didn't mean much, but it still stung. Tess would giggle along, adding her own jabs about Lena's accent or how she didn't fit in with their crowd. Kyle, always standing just behind Ethan, would puff out his chest and laugh, his eyes filled with mockery. Lena didn't react, at least not outwardly. She had learned the hard way that showing weakness only made things worse. She had been through worse in her life than these petty insults, but they still gnawed at her, the little cracks forming in her armor. It was hard to walk through the halls without feeling like everyone was looking at her, judging her. It wasn't just the whispers anymore. It was the stares, the way they'd stop talking when she walked by, or the way they'd laugh as if she wasn't even human. The hardest part, however, wasn't the bullying. It was the silence from everyone else. No one spoke up, not the teachers, not the other students. Lena felt like she was invisible, like she was nothing more than a problem to be avoided. The isolation was suffocating. One day, as Lena passed Ethan and his friends in the hallway, he called out to her loud enough for the entire crowd to hear. "Hey Lena, do they even have beauty salons where you come from? Your hair's like a jungle." The laughter that followed was deafening. Tess and Kyle joined in, and for a moment Lena felt like the walls were closing in. She didn't look back. She kept walking, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel their eyes on her, but she refused to let them see the pain. Lena knew she had to survive this, but with every joke, every comment, she began to wonder, how long could she keep pretending it didn't hurt? As the weeks passed, the bullying didn't stop. If anything, it only intensified. Lena had hoped that by keeping her head down and staying quiet, she could avoid confrontation. But every day was another reminder that she was different, that she didn't belong. The subtle taunts, the cruel glances, and the whispered jokes behind her back all began to add up, and soon they became impossible to ignore. The worst part of it all was that it wasn't just the students who made her feel like an outsider. The teachers, though kind and well-meaning, did nothing. They saw the mocking looks from Ethan and his friends, the snickers when Lena walked into the room, but they turned a blind eye. It was as though they were afraid to rock the boat, to challenge the social order of the school. Lena could sense it, the indifference from the adults who should have stepped in, the silence from the students who witnessed it but chose not to speak up. Ethan, Tess, and Kyle had made it their mission to make Lena's life a living hell. They weren't content with just whispering insults anymore. They began to humiliate her in front of the entire school. It started with Ethan making fun of her hair, calling it wild and unmanageable. He said it so loudly in class one day that the whole room erupted into laughter. Lena tried to brush it off, keeping her head down and focusing on the teacher, but she felt the sting of his words cutting through her like a blade. Tess and Kyle joined in, egging him on with their laughter, making Lena feel small, insignificant, and alone. But it didn't stop there. One afternoon, as Lena walked into the school's art classroom, Ethan, Tess, and Kyle were already there, standing near the front. The air felt thick with anticipation, and for a moment, Lena had the feeling that something was wrong. She tried to shake the feeling off, walking to her usual seat in the back corner of the room. But just as she was about to sit down, Tess stepped in front of her, blocking her way. "Hey, Lena," Tess said with a sly smile. "I think it's time for a makeover. You know, you really could use a little touch-up." Lena froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She had been through enough at this point to know what was coming. Ethan was standing nearby, his arms crossed, a smug look on his face. Kyle, always eager to play the enforcer, stood next to Tess, waiting for her cue. Before Lena could react, Tess held up a pair of sharp scissors in her hand. The metal gleamed in the harsh fluorescent light, and the cold air seemed to grow heavier. Lena's mind raced. She wanted to say something, to fight back, but the words wouldn't come. Her fists clenched at her sides, but she didn't move. She stood there frozen, as Tess stepped forward, scissors in hand. "Relax, Lena," Tess continued, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. "It's just a little trim." Lena's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just bullying anymore. This was something else. It was an assault on her dignity, on her very sense of self. Her hair, the one part of her she had always been proud of, was about to be taken from her in front of the entire class. It felt like a violation, an attempt to strip away the last thing that made her feel like herself. Without thinking, Lena stepped back, her mind screaming for her to run, to get out of there. But before she could, Ethan's voice called out from behind her. "Don't run, Lena," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "It's just a joke. You really need to lighten up." The whole room was watching, and the laughter started. It was the kind of laughter that felt like a punch to the gut. It wasn't funny, it wasn't even clever, but it was cruel, and it was meant to hurt. Lena's heart raced in her chest as she felt the sting of humiliation wash over her. Her fists tightened, and for a split second, she considered doing something, anything to make them stop. But then she remembered. Her silence, her restraint, had always been her shield. The only way she had survived the harshness of her old life was by staying strong, by not letting them see her break. Instead of reacting, Lena stood there, breathing deeply, her head held high, even as Tess slowly reached out with the scissors. Lena's silence was the only answer she could give them. She wouldn't let them see her cry, wouldn't let them have the satisfaction of breaking her. But inside, something had shifted. Something inside Lena began to crack. She could feel it, the anger, the frustration, the years of pain and injustice all building up inside her. For the first time, she wasn't sure how much longer she could stay quiet. The days following the incident in the art room were a blur for Lena. She walked through the hallways of Eagle Ridge in a fog, her mind racing. The scissors had come so close, and in that moment, when Tess had gripped her hair, it felt like the last shred of her identity was about to be ripped away. But Lena had stood her ground, refusing to show them the pain they so desperately wanted to see. It was in that moment of silence, in the face of their mockery, that something inside her began to change. She wasn't sure what it was yet, but Lena knew she couldn't let this go on any longer. The bullying had gone too far, but she didn't know how to stop it. There was only so much one person could take before they broke. But deep down, Lena knew that breaking wasn't an option. The years of hardship in Chicago had taught her how to survive, how to keep moving even when the weight of the world felt too heavy. The quiet battle she had fought for so long, staying invisible, staying strong, wasn't enough anymore. The world around her was demanding more. It was during one of those long, exhausting days that Principal Harris approached Lena. He was a tall, quiet man who always seemed to have an aura of calm around him, but Lena had never really spoken to him before. When he asked if she was okay, she was taken aback. It was the first time anyone at Eagle Ridge had asked her that question with sincerity. She hesitated for a moment before nodding. "I'm fine, sir," she said, her voice quiet. But Principal Harris didn't let her off that easily. "You don't have to pretend with me, Lena. I've seen how you've been treated." He paused, his eyes searching hers. And for the first time since transferring, Lena saw something other than indifference in the eyes of an adult. "I know it's hard, and I know this school has failed you, but I want you to know that I'm here to support you." Lena stared at him, unsure what to say. No one had ever offered her support in this way before. Her entire life, she had been taught to fight on her own, to keep her head down and survive. But here, in the midst of her pain, was someone who seemed to genuinely care. "I don't know what to do," Lena admitted, her voice shaky. It feels like no one is on my side. The bullying, it's not just the kids. It's like the whole school is ignoring it." Principal Harris nodded, his expression serious. "You're not alone, Lena, but you need to know that you don't have to keep carrying this burden on your own. I want to help you fight this, but you have to let me in. You need to let others help you too." Lena felt something stir inside her, a flicker of hope, a sense of strength she hadn't realized was still there. She had been fighting this battle on her own for so long, thinking that silence was the only way to protect herself. But maybe, just maybe, it was time to let someone else in. It was time to stand up, not just for herself, but for everyone else who had suffered in silence. For the next few days, Lena gathered her courage. She spoke with Principal Harris, telling him about the things that had been happening, how Ethan, Tess, and Kyle had tormented her, how the teachers had ignored it, and how, despite everything, she felt completely alone. Harris listened patiently, his expression unwavering as he took down notes. "I'm going to help you, Lena," he said, his voice steady. "We can't let this go on. I'll talk to the school board. We'll get your story out there. But I need you to trust me." Lena wasn't sure what kind of support she would get, but something in Harris's words struck a chord in her. For the first time, she felt seen, not just as an outsider, but as a person with the right to be treated with respect. The next morning, Lena walked through the halls of Eagle Ridge with a newfound sense of purpose. She still had no idea how this would play out, but she wasn't going to sit back and let them break her anymore. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, but she also knew that she wasn't alone anymore. Principal Harris had her back, and maybe there were others who would stand up for what was right. As Lena walked past Ethan and his friends, she held her head high, not looking at them, but feeling a shift inside. The bullying hadn't stopped. The whispers still followed her, but for the first time, Lena felt ready to face it. She wouldn't be silent any longer. Her fight had just begun. Lena's resolve grew stronger as the days passed. She had always been the quiet one, the one who endured in silence. But after speaking with Principal Harris, something had shifted inside her. She no longer wanted to remain hidden, to allow the bullies to dictate the narrative. Lena realized that she had a voice that could no longer remain silent. She didn't just want to survive anymore. She wanted to speak out and make sure that no one else had to endure the same cruelty she had experienced. Principal Harris kept his promise. He arranged a private meeting with the school board, presented Lena's account of the bullying, and ensured that the issue would not be brushed aside. But Harris knew that to make real change, they needed more than just internal action. They needed the truth to be heard by the wider community. He suggested they bring in a local reporter, someone who could help amplify Lena's story and put pressure on the school to act. Lena, though terrified, agreed. She knew that speaking out would make her even more of a target, but she couldn't let the injustices continue in silence. 2 days later, Lena sat in a quiet cafe with Lena Mercer, a reporter from the local newspaper. The air in the cafe was calm, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside Lena's chest. Lena Mercer was kind, patient and asked all the right questions, encouraging Lena to tell her story. At first, Lena hesitated, unsure of how much to share, but as the conversation went on, she found herself opening up about everything. The way Ethan and his friends had humiliated her, how the teachers had turned a blind eye, and how the bullying had made her feel like she didn't belong. She spoke about the microaggressions, the whispered insults, and how even the small, seemingly harmless comments had begun to build up and take a toll on her mental and emotional health. "I never wanted to be the center of attention," Lena said, her voice quiet but steady. "I just wanted to go to school, to learn, to be left alone. But when you're different, when you stand out, it feels like you're always being watched, always being judged." Lena Mercer listened intently, her eyes reflecting a deep empathy. "You're not alone in this, Lena," she said softly. "Your story matters. People need to hear it. I believe this will change things for you, for others who are too afraid to speak up." Lena nodded, the weight of what she was about to do settling heavily on her shoulders. She knew this wasn't going to be easy, but for the first time, she felt like she wasn't carrying the burden alone. By telling her story, she was not just standing up for herself, but for everyone who had ever felt marginalized, bullied, or forgotten. The interview was published 2 days later with the headline, "The Voice of Silence: One Student's Fight Against Bullying and Racism." The article detailed Lena's experiences at Eagle Ridge, highlighting the everyday racism and bullying she had faced, and how the school had failed to address the issue. Lena's words were raw, honest, and powerful. The article quickly spread across social media, and before long, it had gone viral. Students, parents, and even alumni began speaking out, sharing their own experiences of discrimination and bullying at the school. Some were former students who had been silenced for years. Others were current students who felt empowered by Lena's courage. As the article gained traction, the school's reputation began to shift. What had once been seen as a prestigious institution was now under scrutiny, its failure to protect its students exposed for the world to see. Lena knew that the consequences of her actions were far-reaching, but she couldn't back down now. The more people spoke out, the more powerful the movement became. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was a symbol of resistance, of strength in the face of adversity. That afternoon, Lena sat alone in the library, trying to process everything that had happened. Her phone buzzed with notifications, messages of support, but also some filled with anger, hatred, and threats. Her heart raced as she scrolled through the messages, but she tried not to focus on the negative. For every hateful message, there were 10 others offering her encouragement and thanks. Lena realized that her story had sparked something bigger than herself. The pressure was building, and the public was demanding change. As she walked through the hallways the next day, the whispers were still there, but something had shifted. People were watching her, not with the same cold judgment, but with something else: curiosity, respect, maybe even fear. But it wasn't just the students who were watching. The teachers, too, were beginning to take notice. Lena could feel their eyes on her as she walked to class. The indifference that had once surrounded her was slowly beginning to crack. The administration knew that they couldn't ignore this anymore. They had no choice but to act. Lena had started a revolution, not just in the halls of Eagle Ridge, but in the hearts and minds of everyone who had ever felt silenced. Lena walked into the school the next day, feeling the weight of what she had set in motion. The hallways, once filled with whispers and stares, were now quieter. People still watched her, but there was a new sense of respect, maybe even fear. Her story had spread like wildfire, and the community was paying attention. But the most profound shift wasn't in the students or the faculty. It was in Lena herself. For the first time since arriving at Eagle Ridge, she didn't feel like an outsider. She felt like she belonged, because she had taken a stand for herself, for her identity, and for everyone who had been silenced by cruelty. Principal Harris had kept his word. The school had acted swiftly after Lena's interview went viral. The school board had been forced to take action in a way they had never expected. Ethan Westbrook, Tess Richards, and Kyle Foster were all called in for a disciplinary hearing. The school's administrators had no choice but to suspend them, permanently in Kyle and Tess's case. Ethan, however, was placed on probation, stripped of his leadership position, and forced to give a public apology to Lena. It wasn't just the students who were held accountable. The administration knew it couldn't ignore the systemic issues anymore. They launched several new initiatives, including cultural sensitivity training and stricter policies against bullying. They promised to build a safer, more inclusive environment where no one would have to go through what Lena had. But even as the school took action, Lena knew the fight wasn't over. The real test, Lena realized, wasn't about the punishments the bullies would face. It wasn't about the public apology that would never feel truly sincere. It was about how the community would change moving forward. Would the teachers, the students, and the administration learn from this experience? Or would they continue to sweep uncomfortable truths under the rug? Lena had already made up her mind. She wasn't going to let things slide again. She had started a conversation that needed to continue, and she was going to be at the forefront of it. She had spoken out for herself, but now she would speak for others. She would never again allow her dignity to be taken from her. After the public announcement, Lena found herself standing outside the school building, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. The school bell rang, signaling the end of the day, but she didn't move. Instead, she stayed where she was, taking a deep breath as the noise of the crowd faded around her. Then she saw Ethan. He was standing off to the side, looking at the ground, his face pale and unreadable. For the first time, he wasn't surrounded by a group of friends, wasn't flanked by Tess or Kyle. He was alone. The once arrogant and untouchable leader of the school had been reduced to a quiet figure, isolated by his own actions. Lena's heart didn't race with anger or satisfaction like she thought it might. Instead, she felt a strange mix of pity and disappointment. This was the result of privilege gone unchecked, of power used to hurt others instead of build them up. She realized then that Ethan wasn't the enemy. He was a product of a system that taught him to believe his worth came from putting others down. He had never been taught that strength came from respecting others, from seeing them as equals, not as tools to elevate himself. Lena approached him slowly, her gaze steady. Ethan looked up, his eyes meeting hers for the first time in weeks. His usual bravado was gone, replaced by a quiet vulnerability. "I never meant for it to go this far," he said, his voice hoarse. Lena didn't respond right away. Instead, she studied him, considering his words. She wasn't sure if he understood the full weight of what he had done, or if he was just trying to salvage whatever remained of his reputation. "I don't need an apology, Ethan," she finally said, her voice calm but firm. "What you did to me was wrong. But what matters now is what you do next. Strength doesn't come from putting others down. It comes from lifting them up." Ethan's eyes flickered with a mix of confusion and regret. But he didn't say anything more. He didn't need to. Lena had made her point. As Lena walked away, she felt lighter, like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The battle had been long, but it wasn't just about winning. It was about reclaiming her dignity, her sense of self. It was about showing the world that no one had the right to make her feel small, to make her feel less than. She had fought for herself, yes, but now her fight was for everyone who had ever been made to feel invisible, to feel like they didn't matter. She knew there would be more battles ahead, but for the first time, she was ready to face them head on. She wasn't alone anymore. And as she stepped out of the school gates for the last time that day, she didn't look back. Because for the first time, she knew she had won, not just the battle, but the war.